The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in hues of orange and gold as Madeline Calloway stared down the barrel of her father's Winchester rifle at the 5 riders approaching her ranch house. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes remained fixed and determined. At 24, she never imagined she'd be the last line of defense for the Circle C Ranch, the only home she'd ever known. 6 months after burying her father, Madeline faced a threat more dangerous than drought or disease. The Blackwell Gang had come to claim what she'd fought so hard to keep. "This is private property," she called out, her voice carrying across the dusty yard. "Turn around and ride out the way you came." The lead rider, a man with a pockmarked face and greedy eyes, brought his horse to a stop 30 yards from the porch where Madeline stood. He removed his hat, revealing thinning hair and a cruel smile. "Miss Calloway," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "My name is Vernon Pike. I believe we have some business to discuss regarding your situation." "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Pike," Madeline replied, keeping the rifle steady. "This land belongs to me. I have the deed signed and legal." Pike chuckled, looking back at his companions who snickered in response. "Well now, that's where things get complicated. You see, your father borrowed a considerable sum from my employer before his untimely passing. That debt is now yours to settle." "My father owed nothing to no one," Madeline said, her finger hovering near the trigger. "Now get off my land before I put a hole in that fancy vest of yours." Pike's smile vanished. "You have 1 week, Miss Calloway, 1 week to vacate these premises, or we'll remove you ourselves. The Circle C belongs to Mr. Blackwell now." Before Madeline could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the east drew everyone's attention. A lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the setting sun, moving at a steady pace toward the standoff. The newcomer rode tall in the saddle, his face obscured by the shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat. Pike and his men shifted uneasily as the stranger approached, his horse kicking up dust that glowed golden in the fading light. "Seems like I'm interrupting something," the rider said, his voice deep and steady as he drew his horse to a stop. He looked from Madeline to the gang of men, assessing the situation with cool, gray eyes. "This is private business," Pike snapped. "Keep riding, stranger." The man dismounted, his movements fluid and confident. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind, yet couldn't have been much older than 30. A star-shaped badge gleamed on his chest, partially covered by his duster. "Name's Zachary Vance," he said, hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. "U.S. Marshal. And it looks to me like you boys are causing trouble for this lady." Pike's hand twitched near his gun. "We're just collecting on a debt, lawman, nothing that concerns you." Zachary's gaze hardened as he stepped between Madeline and the riders. "I'm making it my concern. This lady says you're not welcome, and I'm inclined to respect her wishes." "You're outnumbered, Marshal," Pike snarled. Zachary didn't flinch. "Maybe so, but the first man who draws will be dead before he clears leather." "Are you volunteering, Pike?" The tension stretched like a bowstring ready to snap. Pike's men looked to him, waiting for a signal, but the outlaw seemed to think better of challenging the marshal. "This isn't over," Pike finally said, putting his hat back on. "Not by a long shot. 1 week, Miss Calloway. Then we're coming back with more men." As the riders turned their horses and retreated, Zachary maintained his vigilant stance until they disappeared from sight. Only then did he turn to face Madeline. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "seems like you've got yourself a problem." Madeline lowered her rifle, relief and suspicion warring within her. "Why would a U.S. Marshal care about my ranch? I've been tracking the Blackwell Gang for 3 months, he replied. "They've been running this same scheme across the territory. Find vulnerable homesteaders, fabricate debts, then force them off their land." Madeline's eyes narrowed. "And you just happened to ride by at the perfect moment," a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Got word in Bonanza that they were heading this way, figured I'd see what they were up to." He glanced around the property, taking in the weathered barn, the small herd of cattle in the distance, and the modest ranch house. "You running this place alone, I manage," she said defensively. "My father built this ranch from nothing, and I'm not about to let some gang of outlaws take it from me." Zachary nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. They'll be back, you know. Pike doesn't make empty threats. Then I'll be waiting, Madeline said, her chin lifting defiantly. No, Zachary said firmly. You'll get killed and they'll take your ranch anyway. He looked out toward the trail where the riders had disappeared. I aim to stop them before that happens. Madeline studied him, noting the determination in his stance and the conviction in his voice. And why would you do that for me, Marshal? You don't know me from Eve. Zachary turned back to her, his expression solemn. Because it's my job to uphold the law, Miss Calloway, and because no one should lose their home to thieves and murderers. He paused, his gaze meeting hers. Not while I'm breathing. Something about the quiet intensity of his words sent a shiver down Madeline's spine. She'd been alone for so long, fighting to keep the ranch afloat, that the prospect of any help was almost too good to be true. You can stay in the bunkhouse, she said finally. It's not much, but it's dry and there's a bed. Much obliged, Zachary replied with a nod. I'll tend to my horse, then we can discuss what we're up against. As Madeline watched him lead his stallion toward the barn, she couldn't help but wonder if this mysterious lawman was truly her salvation, or just another complication in an already desperate situation. Either way, she had the distinct feeling that the arrival of Marshal Zachary Vance was about to change everything. The bunkhouse was indeed sparse, but Zachary didn't seem to mind. After caring for his horse, he joined Madeline on the porch of the main house where she'd prepared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and coffee. The evening air had cooled, bringing relief from the day's heat, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The Blackwell Gang has been operating across Arizona and New Mexico for the past 2 years, Zachary explained between bites. Walter Blackwell started as a small-time hustler in Texas before moving west. Now he controls a network of outlaws who specialize in land theft and extortion. Madeline poured more coffee into his cup. And what about Pike? Vernon Pike is Blackwell's right hand, cold-blooded killer with a dozen wanted posters to his name. Zachary's expression darkened. I almost had him in Tucson last month, but he slipped away. How do they usually operate? Madeline asked, wanting to understand what she was facing. They identify properties they want, usually ones with good water access, valuable timber, or mining potential. Then they fabricate debts or find legal loopholes to force the owners out. He paused, studying her. What exactly did Pike say about your father's supposed debt? Madeline's jaw tightened. He claimed my father borrowed money before he died, but that's impossible. Pa was proud, sometimes to a fault. He'd have sooner starved than take a loan, especially from someone like Blackwell. Do you know why they might be interested in your land specifically? Madeline hesitated, then nodded. There have been rumors of a railroad spur line coming through this valley. If that happens, property values will soar. Zachary nodded thoughtfully. That would explain their interest. Railroad land can be worth 10 times what ranching land is worth. A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their meal, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. How long have you been running this place alone? Zachary finally asked. 6 months since Pa died. Before that, I helped him for years. Madeline's eyes took on a faraway look. My mother passed when I was 12, so it was just the two of us. He taught me everything: how to mend fences, brand cattle, even shoot. A small smile played at her lips. Said I was a better shot than most men he knew. I believe it, Zachary replied with a hint of admiration. Still, it's a lot of work for one person. We had a couple of ranch hands, but she trailed off, her expression hardening. They left after Pa died, said they wouldn't work for a woman. Zachary's brow furrowed. Their loss. Madeline looked at him curiously. You don't seem bothered by a woman running a ranch. I've learned to judge people by their actions, not by what others think they should or shouldn't be doing. He set down his empty cup. My mother ran our family farm in Kansas after my father was killed in the war, raised 3 children, and kept the place profitable. Taught me that strength comes in many forms. Something in his tone made Madeline see the marshal in a different light. He wasn't just a lawman passing through, there was depth to him, a sense of purpose that went beyond the badge he wore. Tomorrow I'll ride into Bonanza, he said, changing the subject. Need to send some telegrams, see what information I can gather about Blackwell's current activities. I'll come with you, Madeline said firmly. I need supplies anyway, and she hesitated, then continued with determination. I won't hide away on my own property out of fear. Zachary studied her for a moment, then nodded. We'll leave at first light. As he stood to take his leave, Madeline felt a strange reluctance to see him go. It had been months since she'd had a real conversation with anyone, and despite the danger that had brought him to her door, there was something comforting about his presence. Marshal Vance, she called as he stepped off the porch. Thank you for stepping in today. He turned, his face half illuminated by the light from the window. Get some rest, Miss Calloway. Tomorrow's likely to be a long day. As Madeline watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that Marshal Zachary Vance was unlike any man she'd ever met. And in that moment, despite the threat hanging over her ranch, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Dawn broke with streaks of pink and gold stretching across the eastern sky as Madeline emerged from the ranch house. She dressed practically in a split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a blue cotton blouse, her chestnut hair braided and pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. A loaded pistol rested in the holster at her hip, a necessity for any woman traveling the open country, especially one with a target on her back. Zachary was already in the yard, checking the cinch on his saddle. He'd shaved, and his dark hair was neatly combed back. The morning light caught the angles of his face, highlighting the strong jaw and straight nose. When he looked up and saw her, something flickered in his eyes' appreciation, perhaps before he nodded in greeting. Your horse ready? He asked. I'll saddle her now, Madeline replied, heading toward the corral where her chestnut mare Penny was waiting. Allow me, Zachary said, falling into step beside her. I'm already done with mine. Madeline hesitated, unused to accepting help, but then relented with a small nod. She watched as he worked with efficient movements, his hands sure and gentle with the animal. Penny, normally wary of strangers, seemed to accept him immediately. You have a way with horses, Madeline observed. Zachary smiled slightly. They're good judges of character, honest creatures. Unlike people, she couldn't help adding, his eyes met hers. Some people, not all. There was something in his gaze that made her look away first, an intensity that unsettled her in ways she wasn't prepared to examine. Once the horses were ready, they set off toward Bonanza, a small but growing town about an hour's ride from the Circle C. The morning was pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. They rode side by side, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats creating a comfortable backdrop for conversation. How long have you been a marshal? Madeline asked, curious about the man who had appointed himself her protector. 5 years, Zachary replied. Spent 3 years as a deputy in Wichita before that. And before Wichita, a shadow passed over his face. War, like a lot of men my age, Madeline nodded, understanding his reluctance to elaborate. The war between the states had left scars on countless men, physical and otherwise. What about you? He asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. Have you always lived at the Circle C, born and raised? She confirmed. My father came west in '49, but California gold didn't pan out for him. He met my mother in Tucson, bought the land that became the Circle C, and started building something real. Pride colored her voice. By the time I was born in '58, they had a small herd and the beginnings of the ranch you see now. He must have been quite a man. He was, Madeline said softly. Stubborn as a mule and twice as hardworking. After Mother died, he poured everything into the ranch, said it was her legacy as much as his. They crested a small rise, and the town of Bonanza came into view in the valley below. Despite being relatively new, it had grown rapidly due to its position near both cattle trails and potential mining sites. A cluster of wooden buildings lined the main street, with smaller homes and establishments spreading outward. It's changed since I was last here, Madeline remarked. New saloon, looks like, and that mercantile has expanded. Progress comes fast out here, Zachary said, sometimes too fast for some folks' liking. They rode into town, drawing curious glances from the people on the boardwalks. A woman on horseback alongside a marshal made for an unusual sight, especially one as striking as Madeline with her proud posture and determined expression. They tied their horses outside the telegraph office, and Zachary turned to Madeline. "This shouldn't take long." "Then we can see about your supplies." "I'll wait right here," she assured him. "I want to know what you find out." Inside the small office, the telegrapher looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his face at the sight of the marshal's badge. "Well now, don't often see federal law in these parts," the man said, setting aside the newspaper he'd been reading. "What can I do for you, Marshal?" "Need to send some wires," Zachary said, producing a small notebook from his pocket. "And I'm wondering if you've received any messages for Zachary Vance." The telegrapher checked a small stack of papers. "Matter of fact, got one came in yesterday evening." He handed over a yellow slip. Zachary read it quickly, his expression giving nothing away. "Now I need to send responses to Tucson, Prescott, and Santa Fe." He began writing out the messages while Madeline watched, curious about the contents but not wanting to pry. As they left the telegraph office, Zachary seemed deep in thought. Madeline waited until they were out of earshot of others before asking, "Did you learn anything useful?" "Blackwell was spotted in Prescott 3 days ago," he replied quietly, "and there's been unusual activity at some of his known hideouts. Something big is brewing, related to my ranch." "Possibly, the railroad deal you mentioned might be part of it." He guided her toward the mercantile. "Let's get your supplies, then we need to talk to the local sheriff. I want to know what he's heard." The mercantile was busy with morning customers, mostly women gathering provisions and a few ranch hands picking up supplies. The proprietor, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, brightened when he saw Madeline. "Miss Calloway, ain't seen you in town for weeks. How's things out at the Circle C?" "Managing, Mr. Donovan," Madeline replied with a polite smile. "I need flour, coffee, sugar, and some ammunition for the Winchester." As Donovan gathered her items, Madeline noticed a group of men at the far end of the store watching her and Zachary with undisguised interest. One of them, a tall man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, whispered something to his companions and they snickered. Zachary had noticed too. His posture changed subtly, becoming more alert, though his expression remained neutral. When Madeline had completed her purchases, he took the heavy sack of supplies from her despite her protests. "Let me," he said simply, and something in his tone made her acquiesce. Outside, he loaded the supplies onto her horse, his movements efficient but his attention clearly divided. "Those men in there," he said quietly. "Do you know them? The one with the scar is Illy Ransom. He's worked odd jobs around Bonanza, but there've been rumors he's involved in less reputable activities. The others I've seen around but don't know by name." Zachary nodded. "They're Blackwell's men." "Ransom's wanted for armed robbery in New Mexico." Madeline felt a chill run down her spine. "They're watching us." "Yes," Zachary confirmed, "but they won't try anything in broad daylight, not with this many witnesses." He secured the last of her supplies. "Let's go talk to the sheriff, then head back to the ranch. I don't like the idea of being in town longer than necessary." The sheriff's office was a small building next to the jailhouse, with a weathered sign hanging above the door. Inside, they found Sheriff Thomas Morgan, a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and a perpetually weary expression. "Marshal," he greeted Zachary with a nod after introductions were made. "Heard you were in the territory. Didn't expect to see you in my jurisdiction." "Following a lead on the Blackwell Gang," Zachary explained. "They've taken an interest in Miss Calloway's property." Morgan's bushy eyebrows rose as he looked at Madeline. "That's so? Well, can't say I'm surprised. There's been talk about that railroad spur line for months now. So it's confirmed." Madeline asked, "The railroad is coming through the valley." "Nothing official," Morgan hedged, "but there've been surveyors out that way and land speculators showing up in town." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Couple of ranches to the north of yours have already sold out. To Blackwell." Zachary asked sharply, not directly, "To companies with fancy names and representatives in nice suits." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "But I wouldn't be surprised if Blackwell's behind it somehow. Man's got connections that reach further than you'd expect." Zachary shared what he knew about Pike's visit to the Circle C and the threat they'd made. Morgan listened gravely, occasionally jotting notes. "I wish I could offer more help." the sheriff said when Zachary finished, "but I've got just 2 deputies and a county bigger than some states to patrol. Best I can do is keep an eye out and let you know if I hear anything." "I understand," Zachary said, though his disappointment was evident. "Just be aware that Blackwell's got men in town. Illy ransom for one." Morgan's expression darkened. "Ransom, that's trouble waiting to happen." "I'll have my deputies keep an extra watch on him." As they prepared to leave, Morgan stopped them. "Marshal, a word of advice. Blackwell doesn't like to lose and he's got friends in high places. Watch your back." "Always do," Zachary replied grimly. Back on the street, Madeline felt eyes following them as they moved toward their horses. The tension in the air was palpable, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "We should leave now," Zachary said quietly. "Those men from the store are across the street watching." Madeline glanced discreetly in that direction and saw Ransom and his companions lounging in front of the saloon, making no effort to hide their interest. "Agreed," she said, swinging up into her saddle with practiced ease. They rode out of town at a steady pace, not so fast as to suggest they were fleeing, but with clear purpose. Neither spoke until Bonanza was well behind them, hidden by the rolling terrain. "They'll report back to Pike," Zachary finally said. "Now they know I'm involved in staying at your ranch." "Is that bad?" Madeline asked, though she already suspected the answer. "It means they'll be more cautious, maybe change their plans, but it also means they might decide to move sooner rather than later." He looked at her directly. "I won't lie to you, Miss Calloway. The next few days could be dangerous." Madeline met his gaze steadily. "I'm not afraid, Marshal Vance." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "No, I don't believe you are, but caution isn't the same as fear." They rode in contemplative silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its heat intensifying as midday approached. "You never told me what was in that telegraph you received," Madeline said eventually. Zachary hesitated before answering. "My superior in Tucson has authorized me to stay and investigate the situation at your ranch. He believes it could be the opportunity we've been waiting for to catch Blackwell in the act." Madeline processed this information. "So I'm bait." "No," Zachary said firmly. "You're a citizen entitled to protection under the law, and I intend to provide that protection while bringing Blackwell to justice." "And if those 2 goals conflict?" Madeline asked shrewdly. Zachary's expression was solemn. "They won't, not while I'm breathing." There it was again, that phrase that had stirred something within her when he first uttered it. The absolute conviction in his voice made her believe him, despite the rational part of her mind that warned against trusting too easily. As the Circle C came into view, Madeline felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. This land was more than just property to her, it was her heritage, her future, the embodiment of her parents' dreams. She glanced at the man riding beside her, his profile strong against the backdrop of the Arizona landscape. For the first time since her father's death, Madeline allowed herself to believe that perhaps she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. And that realization brought with it a flutter of something else, something she wasn't quite ready to name. The next 3 days passed in a state of watchful tension. Zachary insisted on implementing security measures around the ranch, establishing lookout points, planning escape routes, and ensuring Madeline's weapons were clean and in working order. They took turns keeping watch, though Zachary shouldered the lion's share of night duty despite Madeline's protests. On the 4th morning, Madeline found him at the corral mending a section of fence that had come loose. The early light cast long shadows across the yard as she approached with 2 cups of steaming coffee. "Thought you might want this," she said, offering him one of the cups. "Much appreciated," he replied, taking it gratefully. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing tanned forearms corded with muscle. A fine sheen of sweat already glistened on his brow despite the early hour. "You don't have to do that, you know," Madeline said, nodding toward the fence. "You're already doing more than enough keeping watch at night." Zachary took a sip of coffee before responding. "I'm not much good at sitting idle. Besides, keeping busy helps me think." "And what are you thinking about?" Madeline asked, leaning against the corral post. "Pike said they'd be back in a week. That gives us 3 more days." He drove another nail into the fence post with decisive blows. They could come sooner, trying to catch us off guard, or they might wait, hoping to wear down our vigilance. Either way, we'll be ready, Madeline said with conviction. Zachary paused, studying her with those perceptive gray eyes. You're not what I expected, Madeline Calloway. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. What did you expect? She asked, curious. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. When I heard about a woman running a ranch alone out here, I pictured someone. Harder, more bitter about the hand life dealt her. Madeline considered this. There were times after Pa died when I could have become that person. Some days I still might. She looked out across the land that had shaped her. But bitterness takes energy, and I've got a ranch to run. Zachary's smile widened slightly. Practical? I try to be, she said, returning his smile. What about you? You've spent years chasing outlaws across the territory. That seems a lonely way to live. Something shadowed his expression. It's the path I chose. But why? Madeline pressed gently. What made you pin on that badge? Zachary was silent for so long that Madeline thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more reflective. After the war, I came home to find my family's farm burned to the ground. Raiders had come through, not soldiers, just men taking advantage of the chaos. My mother and younger sister were. He paused, the painful memory evident in his eyes. They didn't survive. I'm so sorry, Madeline said softly. The local law didn't do much. Too busy, too few resources, so I tracked those men myself. His jaw tightened at the memory. Found them in a Kansas town, drinking and gambling like they hadn't destroyed innocent lives. What did you do? What I wanted to do was kill them all, Zachary admitted. Had my gun drawn, finger on the trigger, but there was a marshal in that town, older man named Harlan. He stopped me, talked me down, said if I wanted justice, not just revenge, there were better ways to get it. He looked down at his badge. He convinced me to channel that anger into something constructive, been wearing the badge ever since. Madeline was moved by his honesty, by the glimpse into what drove this man who had come to her aid. Did they face justice? The raiders, Zachary nodded. Harlan and I gathered evidence, built a case. They hanged for their crimes, not just what they did to my family, but to a dozen others. His eyes met hers. That's why I do this, because sometimes people need someone to stand between them and those who would harm them. The conviction in his voice stirred something deep within Madeline. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The contact sent a jolt through her, surprising in its intensity. Zachary seemed similarly affected, his eyes darkening as he looked at her hand on his skin. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then, with visible effort, Zachary stepped back, breaking the contact. I should finish this fence, he said, his voice rough. And we need to check the north boundary today. I want to make sure we have clear sightlines if Pike and his men approach from that direction. Madeline nodded, both disappointed and relieved by the return to practical matters. I'll get the horses ready. As she walked back to the house, she couldn't ignore the warmth lingering in her palm where it had touched him, or the quickening of her pulse that had nothing to do with fear or danger. Marshal Zachary Vance had come to protect her ranch, but Madeline was beginning to realize that something else entirely might be at risk her heart. The north boundary of the Circle C Ranch bordered a stretch of rugged terrain, a mix of scrub-dotted hills and shallow ravines that eventually gave way to more mountainous country. It was the most vulnerable approach to the ranch, offering numerous places for ambush or concealment. Zachary and Madeline spent most of the day scouting the area, identifying potential danger spots and discussing defense strategies. The work was necessary, but also served as a welcome distraction from the charged moment they'd shared earlier. This ravine concerns me, Zachary said as they paused atop a small rise overlooking a winding cut in the earth. It provides cover almost to within rifle range of the main house. Madeline nodded, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun. Pa was always worried about it too. He talked about building a watchtower on this rise, but never got around to it. Smart man, Zachary murmured. From up here, you could see anyone approaching for miles. They continued their survey, working their way back toward the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The shared purpose and the physical demands of the day had restored a comfortable rhythm between them, the earlier tension receding but not disappearing entirely. As they crested the final hill before the ranch came into view, Zachary suddenly raised his hand, signaling Madeline to stop. His posture had changed, alert and tense. "What is it?" she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her pistol. "Smoke," he said grimly, pointing toward the ranch. "Too much for just a cooking fire." Madeline's heart lurched as she saw a dark plume rising from the direction of the outbuildings. Without hesitation, she spurred her horse forward, Zachary calling her name as he galloped after her. They raced across the open ground, the smell of burning wood growing stronger with each stride. As they approached the ranch yard, Madeline saw with horror that the small storage shed near the barn was engulfed in flames. 2 ranch hands from a neighboring property were already there, frantically working to prevent the fire from spreading to the barn itself. Madeline dismounted before her horse had fully stopped, rushing toward the scene. "Frank, what happened?" she called to the older of the 2 men. Frank Dawson, a weathered cowhand who'd occasionally helped her father, looked up from where he was passing buckets of water to his young companion. "Miss Calloway, thank the Lord you're back. Rode by and saw the smoke. Got here maybe 10 minutes ago." Zachary had joined them, immediately taking charge of the situation. "Is anyone hurt? Was anyone seen in the area?" "No injuries, Marshal," Frank replied, continuing his work. "As for who did it, can't say for certain, but I found this." He nodded toward a piece of paper pinned to the corral post with a knife. Zachary retrieved it while Madeline joined the bucket line. The fire was beginning to come under control, though the shed was clearly a total loss. After reading the note, Zachary's expression darkened. "What does it say?" Madeline called, passing another bucket down the line. Zachary's jaw was tight with anger. "Next time it's the house. Tick-tock." He crumpled the paper in his fist. "Pike's calling card." It took another hour to fully extinguish the fire and ensure no embers remained that might reignite. By then, dusk had fallen, casting long shadows across the yard. Frank and his young helper, Tom, accepted Madeline's grateful thanks and her offer of a meal before heading back to their own ranch. "I appreciate you boys coming to help," she said as they sat at her kitchen table, plates of beans and biscuits before them. "Not everyone would have." Frank waved away her thanks. "Your pa was a good man, Miss Calloway. Helped me out more than once when times were lean. Least I could do." "Did you see anyone suspicious on your way here?" Zachary asked, standing near the window where he could keep watch on the yard. Frank shook his head. "Road was clear, but Tom here says he spotted dust from riders heading east about an hour before we saw the smoke." Young Tom nodded eagerly. "3 of 'em, maybe 4, moving fast." Zachary and Madeline exchanged a look. "Pike's men," she said quietly. "Most likely," Zachary agreed. "They're sending a message, trying to intimidate you into leaving." Frank cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, Miss Calloway, but word's getting around about what's happening here. Folks in town are talking." "What are they saying?" Madeline asked, though she could guess the answer. "Some say you'd be wise to sell and move on," Frank admitted. "Others admire your grit for standing your ground." He glanced at Zachary. "Having a U.S. Marshal on your side has raised some eyebrows, too." After Frank and Tom departed, promising to spread word if they saw anything suspicious, Madeline and Zachary assessed the damage to the shed in the light of a lantern. The structure was beyond salvaging, its contents mostly tools and feed destroyed. "It could have been worse," Madeline said, trying to maintain her optimism, "if they'd set fire to the barn or the house." "That's next, according to their note," Zachary said grimly. "Pike's escalating the situation. He's trying to drive you out before his deadline." Madeline's shoulders slumped slightly as the events of the day caught up with her. "Maybe I'm being foolish, fighting a battle I can't win." "Is that what you believe?" Zachary asked, his tone neutral but his eyes intent on her face. She looked around at the ranch her home now partially illuminated by the lantern's glow. Despite the day's setback, a fierce determination rose within her. "No," she said firmly. "This is my land, my legacy. I won't be bullied off it." A subtle smile curved Zachary's lips. "Then we keep fighting." They walked back toward the house, the night having fully settled around them. The sky was clear, stars appearing like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "We should double the watch tonight," Zachary said. "I don't think they'll return so soon, but I'd rather not take chances." "I'll take first watch," Madeline offered. "You hardly slept last night." Zachary shook his head. "We'll both stay alert. I'll watch the north approach, you take the south. We'll meet back here in 2 hours to trade positions." Madeline nodded, understanding the necessity but dreading the long night ahead. As they reached the porch, she paused, turning to face him in the gentle light spilling from the window. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for today, but for believing in me, for not telling me to give up." Zachary's expression softened as he looked down at her. "You're not someone who gives up, Madeline Calloway. It's not in your nature." "How can you be so sure?" she asked. "You've only known me for days." "Some things you can tell right away about a person," he replied. His hand reached up, hesitating briefly before gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped her braid during the firefighting efforts. The way they face adversity, the strength in their eyes, the simple touch sent warmth cascading through her. They stood close enough that she could smell the mixture of smoke, leather, and something uniquely him. For a moment, Madeline thought he might lean down, close the distance between them. Part of her hoped he would. Instead, Zachary stepped back, his professional demeanor returning. "We should prepare for the night watch. I'll get my rifle from the bunkhouse." As he walked away, Madeline pressed her hand to her heart, feeling its accelerated rhythm. In the midst of all the danger and uncertainty, these unexpected feelings for Marshal Zachary Vance were perhaps the most unsettling development of all. The night passed without incident, though neither of them got much rest. By morning, they were tired but vigilant, the threat of Pike's return hanging over them like a storm cloud. Over breakfast, Zachary outlined his plan. "I need to ride to the telegraph office in Bonanza again. I want to request additional marshals from Tucson. Pike's actions yesterday burning your property, leaving threatening notes, that's enough to justify more resources." "Will they come?" Madeline asked. "I think so. Especially when they hear about the potential railroad connection. Land fraud involving railroads is a federal concern." He took a sip of coffee. "I should be back by mid-afternoon. In the meantime, I know," Madeline interrupted. "Stay alert, keep my rifle close, and if anything seems suspicious, lock myself in the house." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You're a quick study." "I'm a quick shot too," she reminded him. "I'll be fine for a few hours. Besides, I doubt Pike will return so soon after yesterday's visit." Zachary nodded, though concern still shadowed his eyes. "I'll ride fast." An hour later, Madeline watched from the porch as Zachary galloped away toward Bonanza. Despite her brave words, she felt vulnerable in his absence. The ranch seemed quieter, the empty spaces more noticeable. To keep her mind occupied, she threw herself into chores feeding the chickens, checking on the cattle in the nearest pasture, and beginning the process of salvaging what could be recovered from the burned shed. The physical labor was welcome, helping to dissipate some of the nervous energy that had built up over the tense night. By midday, she'd worked up a substantial appetite and returned to the house to prepare a simple lunch. As she sliced bread at the kitchen table, a sound from the yard caught her attention: hoofbeats, but not the steady rhythm of a single rider returning. This was the sound of multiple horses approaching at speed. Her heart racing, Madeline grabbed her rifle from beside the door and moved to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. 5 riders were entering the yard, and at their head was Vernon Pike, his pockmarked face twisted in a cruel smile. They dismounted in a loose semicircle facing the house, Pike taking a step forward. "Miss Calloway," he called out, "I think it's time we concluded our business." Madeline's mind raced. She could barricade herself in the house as Zachary had suggested, but the structure wasn't built to withstand a determined assault. She could try to slip out the back and make for the woods, but they'd likely spot her. Neither option seemed promising. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. Opening the door, rifle in hand but not raised, she stepped onto the porch. "You're not welcome here, Pike," she called, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "And you're 3 days early for our appointment." Pike chuckled, spreading his hands in a mock apologetic gesture. Change of plans, I'm afraid. Your marshal friend complicated matters. His eyes narrowed. Speaking of which, where is the good lawman today? Not abandoning a lady in distress, is he? I fight my own battles, Madeline replied coldly. State your business and be gone. My business, Pike said, his voice hardening, is to inform you that your time on this property has come to an end. Mr. Blackwell has been more than patient. Patient, Madeline scoffed. You've threatened me, burned my property, and fabricated debts that don't exist. That's not patience, that's criminal. One of Pike's men, a burly figure with a bushy beard, stepped forward. We ain't here to debate, woman. Pack your things and clear out. We're taking possession now. By whose authority? Madeline demanded. Pike reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. By the authority of this deed of sale, signed by the territorial judge himself. Your father's debts have been called in, and this property has been legally transferred to satisfy those obligations. That's a forgery, Madeline said, though a sliver of doubt crept into her mind. Could they have somehow fabricated legal documents convincing enough to fool a judge? The law doesn't think so, Pike replied with a smug smile. Now you can gather your personal effects and leave peacefully, or we can remove you. Your choice. Madeline's grip tightened on her rifle. She was outnumbered and outgunned, but the thought of surrendering her home to these men made her sick with rage. I'm not going anywhere, she declared. This is my land, and I'll die before I let thieves take it from me. Pike's expression darkened. That can be arranged, Miss Calloway. His hand moved toward his holster, and Madeline raised her rifle, ready to fire even knowing she couldn't possibly take down all 5 men before they shot her. It was a futile gesture of defiance, but she wouldn't go down without a fight. The tension was broken by the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. All heads turned to see Zachary riding hard into the yard, his duster billowing behind him. He reined in sharply, dust swirling around him as he dismounted in one fluid motion, his revolver already drawn. Step away from the lady, he commanded, his voice like steel. Now, Pike's men looked to their leader, hands hovering near their weapons. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, neither side willing to back down. Marshal Vance, Pike finally said, his tone falsely cordial. Just in time to witness a legal property transfer. We have the paperwork right here, signed by Judge Wilson himself. Judge Wilson was arrested yesterday, Zachary replied evenly, for accepting bribes from Walter Blackwell in exchange for falsifying legal documents, including, I'd wager, that worthless piece of paper you're holding. Pike's expression flickered, uncertainty replacing arrogance. You're bluffing. 3 more marshals are on their way from Tucson, Zachary continued, taking a step forward. Along with federal agents investigating Blackwell's land fraud operation. It's over, Pike. For a moment, it seemed Pike might challenge Zachary despite the news. His face contorted with rage and frustration, his hand still near his gun, but then, with visible effort, he controlled himself. This isn't over, he snarled, not by a long shot. It is for today, Zachary said firmly. Now get off this property before I arrest you for trespassing and attempted intimidation. Pike hesitated, then spat on the ground in defiance. With a jerk of his head to his men, he remounted his horse. Blackwell won't forget this, Marshal, neither will I. I'm counting on it, Zachary replied coolly. The outlaws rode out, Pike casting one last venomous glance over his shoulder before they disappeared down the road. Only when they were out of sight did Zachary holster his weapon and turn to Madeline. Are you all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Madeline nodded, the rifle in her hands suddenly heavy as relief flooded through her. Just in time, as usual, she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Zachary climbed the porch steps to stand beside her, his expression grave. I rode back as soon as I sent the telegram. Something didn't feel right. Your instincts were correct, Madeline acknowledged. They would have. I'm not sure what they would have done if you hadn't returned. Zachary's jaw tightened. I can imagine. He looked in the direction the riders had gone. They won't give up, not yet, but what I said is true. Judge Wilson has been arrested, and more marshals are coming. The noose is tightening around Blackwell's operation. Madeline set her rifle aside, suddenly feeling drained. The strain of the confrontation, combined with her lack of sleep the previous night, caught up with her all at once. She swayed slightly on her feet. "Madeline." Zachary's voice seemed to come from far away as darkness edged her vision. She felt his strong arms catch her before she could fall, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "I just need to sit down." "You need rest," he said firmly, carrying her into the house and setting her gently on the sofa. "You've been running on determination alone for too long." Madeline wanted to protest, to insist she was fine, but the comfort of being off her feet was too great. She watched as Zachary moved efficiently around her kitchen, returning with a glass of water which he pressed into her hands. "Drink," he instructed, his tone brooking no argument. She complied, the cool liquid reviving her somewhat. "Thank you," she said, setting down the empty glass. "I don't usually. That is, I'm not in the habit of swooning like some delicate flower." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I never thought you were. Even delicate flowers don't usually face down 5 armed outlaws without flinching." His words warmed her, chasing away some of the lingering embarrassment. "Is it true what you said about Judge Wilson and the additional marshals?" "Yes," Zachary confirmed, taking a seat in the chair across from her. "The telegram I received in Bonanza confirmed Wilson's arrest. The marshals should arrive within 2 days, but in the meantime, Pike and his men might return," Madeline finished for him. "With more men, or at night when we're vulnerable. It's a possibility we have to prepare for," he agreed, "but we won't face them alone. I spoke with Sheriff Morgan in town. He's sending a deputy out to help keep watch tonight." Relief washed over Madeline. The thought of another night on high alert had been daunting. "That's good news." Zachary studied her face, his expression softening. "You should rest now while you can. I'll keep watch and wake you if the deputy arrives or if there's any sign of trouble." Under normal circumstances, Madeline might have resisted, insisted on taking her share of the responsibility. But exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and the comfort of knowing Zachary was watching over her was too tempting to refuse. "Just for an hour," she conceded, already feeling her eyelids grow heavy. "As long as you need," he replied softly. As sleep began to claim her, Madeline was aware of Zachary draping a blanket over her. His hand lingered briefly on her shoulder, a gentle touch that followed her into dreams where danger receded and only warmth remained. When Madeline awoke, golden evening light was streaming through the windows. She blinked in confusion, disoriented by the unexpected length of her rest. The blanket Zachary had placed over her was still tucked around her, and the house was quiet except for the soft sounds of movement in the kitchen. Rising, she folded the blanket and made her way toward the sounds. Zachary stood at the stove, his back to her as he stirred something in a pot. The domesticity of the scene struck her. This man who had faced down outlaws without flinching was now preparing what appeared to be supper in her kitchen. "You should have woken me," she said, announcing her presence. Zachary turned, a wooden spoon in hand. "You needed the rest," he replied simply. "Feel better?" "Much," Madeline admitted, running a hand over her disheveled braid, "though I must look a fright." His eyes traveled over her face in a way that made her heart skip. "Not at all." To cover the sudden flutter in her chest, Madeline gestured to the pot. "What are you making?" "Just a simple stew," he said, returning his attention to the food. "Hope you don't mind me taking liberties with your supplies. After everything you've done, you're welcome to anything in my kitchen." She moved to his side, inhaling the savory aroma. "It smells wonderful." "My mother's recipe," Zachary explained. "One of the few useful things I learned besides tracking and shooting." Madeline smiled at that. "A marshal who cooks. You're full of surprises, Zachary Vance." A comfortable silence fell between them as Madeline set the table and Zachary finished preparing the meal. It felt natural, this sharing of domestic tasks, as if they'd been doing it for years instead of days. "Did the deputy arrive?" Madeline asked as they sat down to eat. Zachary nodded. "About an hour ago. Sam Reynolds seems capable enough. He's keeping watch from the barn loft. Good vantage point." "I know Sam," Madeline said, relieved. "He's young but sharp. His father was friends with my pa." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the events of the day having built an appetite in both of them. Outside, the light continued to fade, the room gradually dimming until Zachary rose to light the oil lamp on the table. The warm glow illuminated their faces, creating an intimate atmosphere that made Madeline acutely aware of his presence across from her. "What happens now?" she asked, setting down her spoon. "With Blackwell and Pike, I mean." Zachary leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "The additional marshals will help us secure the ranch until the federal investigation into Blackwell's operation is complete. With Judge Wilson's cooperation, willing or otherwise, we should be able to untangle the web of fraudulent land deals." "And my ranch," Madeline pressed. "Will I be able to keep it?" "I believe so," Zachary assured her. "Any documents Pike had were almost certainly forgeries. Once Blackwell's scheme is exposed, your legal ownership should be confirmed beyond question." Relief washed over her, but a lingering doubt remained. "And when that happens?" "When the investigation is complete and my ranch is secure." The question hung in the air between them, its implications clear. What would become of this connection they'd formed when the danger was past and his duty fulfilled? Zachary's eyes met hers across the table, their gray depths reflecting the lamplight. "I'm a marshal, Madeline. My job takes me where I'm needed." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. "Of course," she said, looking away. "I understand." "But," he continued, his voice softening, "a man can change his path if he finds something worth staying for." Her gaze snapped back to his face, searching for his meaning. Zachary, before she could finish, a sharp whistle came from outside 3 short bursts, the signal they'd arranged with Deputy Reynolds to indicate trouble. Zachary was on his feet instantly, extinguishing the lamp with a quick breath. "Stay low," he instructed, drawing his revolver as he moved to the window. "Someone's approaching." Madeline's heart hammered in her chest as she retrieved her rifle from where it leaned against the wall. In the sudden darkness, she could just make out Zachary's silhouette as he peered cautiously through the curtain. "Single rider," he reported in a hushed tone. "Coming fast from the east road." "Pike," Madeline whispered, moving to his side. "Can't tell yet." He squinted into the gathering dusk. "Wait, that's Frank Dawson's horse." Relief and concern mingled as Madeline recognized the neighboring ranch hand who'd helped fight the shed fire. Something must be wrong for him to ride out at this hour. They moved to the porch as Frank galloped into the yard, Deputy Reynolds emerging from the barn with his shotgun at the ready. Frank reined in hard, his horse blowing from exertion. "Miss Calloway, Marshal," he called, his voice urgent. "Pike and a dozen men just rode past our place, heading this way. They're armed to the teeth and talking about burning you out." Zachary's expression hardened. "How long ago?" 20 minutes, maybe less," Frank replied, dismounting. "Took a shortcut to warn you." "Much obliged, Frank," Zachary said, his mind clearly racing through options. "They'll be here soon." "Deputy," he called to Reynolds, "get to town as fast as you can. Tell the sheriff we need every man he can spare." Reynolds nodded and sprinted for his horse, mounted, and galloped off toward Bonanza. "What can I do?" Frank asked, determination evident in his weathered face. "You've done enough by warning us," Madeline started to say, but Zachary interrupted. "Can you shoot, Frank?" "Well enough," the ranch hand confirmed. "Then we could use another gun," Zachary decided. "If you're willing," Frank nodded grimly. "Your pa would have done the same for me, Miss Calloway." Zachary quickly outlined a defensive plan. Frank would position himself in the barn loft, covering the eastern approach. Zachary would take the north side near the corral, while Madeline would remain in the house, using the windows as firing positions. "Our advantage is that they don't know we've been warned," Zachary explained. "They're expecting to catch us unawares. Let's use that." As Frank hurried to his position, Zachary turned to Madeline, his expression grave. "You should hide in the root cellar. It's the safest place if they start setting fires." Madeline shook her head firmly. "This is my ranch, Zachary. I'm defending it alongside you." For a moment, it seemed he might argue. Then his expression shifted, respect and something warmer replacing concern. "All right, but stay low and don't take unnecessary risks." "Same goes for you, Marshal," she replied softly. Impulsively, Madeline reached up and pressed her lips to his cheek, a brief touch that conveyed everything she couldn't put into words. His skin was warm beneath her lips, the slight roughness of stubble a reminder of how long they'd been fighting this battle together. When she pulled back, Zachary's eyes were intense, a storm of emotions swirling in their depths. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb gently tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Be careful," he murmured. "I will," she promised. With visible reluctance, he stepped away, duty overriding desire. "I'll be within shouting distance. If you see them approaching from the south, fire a warning shot." Madeline nodded, watching as he disappeared into the darkness. Alone in the house, she quickly extinguished all remaining lamps, then positioned herself at the front window, rifle ready. The night had fully descended now, the only illumination coming from a half-moon partially obscured by scattered clouds. Time stretched, measured by the steady beat of her heart and the occasional soft hoot of an owl. Just when Madeline began to wonder if Frank had somehow been mistaken, she caught movement at the edge of the property, dark shapes advancing slowly through the shadows, spreading out in a rough semicircle. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Madeline aimed at the sky and pulled the trigger. The crack of the rifle shattered the night's silence, followed immediately by answering shots from Zachary's position and the barn loft. The advancing figures scattered, diving for cover, their element of surprise lost. Shouts of confusion and anger erupted from Pike's men, followed by the muzzle flashes of returned fire. Bullets thudded into the wooden walls of the house, one shattering a window across the room. Madeline ducked down, then rose to fire again, aiming at a shadow that had taken position behind the water trough. Her shot went wide, but it forced the man to keep his head down. The exchange of gunfire continued, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Through the chaos, Madeline heard Pike's voice rising above the din. "Burn them out, start with the barn." Fear shot through her as she realized their strategy. If they set fire to the buildings, there would be nowhere to hide, and Frank would be trapped in the barn loft. She needed to warn Zachary. Staying low, Madeline made her way to the back door, intending to circle around to Zachary's position. As she eased the door open, a figure lunged from the shadows. She barely had time to register Pike's sneering face before he grabbed her, one hand clamping over her mouth to stifle her scream. "Thought you could outsmart me, did you?" he hissed, dragging her away from the house. "Let's see how brave your marshal is when he has to choose between you and the ranch." Madeline fought wildly, kicking and clawing at her captor, but Pike's grip was iron. He hauled her toward a cluster of trees where a horse waited, clearly intending to take her as a hostage. With a desperate surge of strength, Madeline bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth. Pike cursed, his grip loosening just enough for her to tear free and shout, "Zachary!" Pike's fist connected with her jaw, sending her sprawling to the ground. Stars exploded in her vision as pain radiated through her face. She rolled, trying to get to her feet, but Pike was on her again, a knife gleaming in his hand. "Should have taken the deal, Miss Calloway," he snarled, raising the blade. A shot rang out and Pike jerked backward, his face contorting in surprise and pain. He staggered, the knife falling from his fingers, then collapsed to his knees. Zachary emerged from the darkness, his revolver still aimed at Pike. "It's over," he said coldly. "Call off your men." Blood blossomed on Pike's shirt front, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. He glared up at Zachary with hatred. "Kill me and Blackwell will send 20 more. "Blackwell's been arrested," Zachary replied evenly. "Federal agents took him into custody in Prescott this afternoon. The telegram came just before I returned to the ranch. Your boss is finished, Pike, and so are you." Pike's face drained of color, whether from the news or his wound, it was hard to tell. "You're lying," he gasped. "The game is up," Zachary insisted. "Call off your men before more blood is shed." For a long moment, Pike seemed to weigh his options. Then, with a resigned slump of his shoulders, he raised his voice. "Stand down, it's over." The gunfire gradually ceased as the order was relayed. In the sudden quiet, Zachary moved to Madeline's side, helping her to her feet while keeping his weapon trained on Pike. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Just bruised," she assured him, though her jaw throbbed where Pike had struck her. The sound of approaching riders drew their attention. For a moment, Madeline feared it was more of Pike's men, but then she recognized Sheriff Morgan's voice calling out, The law had arrived, led by Deputy Reynolds. What followed was a blur of activity. The sheriff and his men rounded up Pike's gang, disarming them and binding their wrists for the journey to the Bonanza jail. Pike himself was given basic medical attention for his wound, which proved to be serious but not life-threatening. Zachary had deliberately aimed to incapacitate, not kill. Frank emerged from the barn unharmed, though the structure bore several bullet holes. The house had fared similarly, with broken windows and splintered wood that would need repair, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. By dawn, the ranch yard was finally clear of lawmen and prisoners. Sheriff Morgan was the last to leave, promising to return the next day with news from Tucson about Blackwell's arrest and the federal investigation. As his horse disappeared down the road, Madeline and Zachary stood side by side on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The same colors that had illuminated their first meeting, now witnessing what felt like a new beginning. "It's over," Madeline said softly, the realization slowly sinking in. "Really over." Zachary nodded, his shoulder brushing against hers. "Pike and his men will stand trial. With Blackwell in custody, the whole operation will unravel. Your ranch is safe now." Madeline turned to look at him, studying the profile that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "And you, what happens to you now, Marshal Vance?" Zachary met her gaze, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "That depends." "On what?" she asked, her heart quickening. "On whether there's a reason for me to stay," he replied quietly. "On whether a certain stubborn rancher might have use for a former marshal." Madeline's breath caught in her throat. "Former?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've been thinking about what you said about how lonely it is chasing outlaws across the territory, about finding something worth staying for." Hope blossomed in Madeline's chest, but she needed to be certain. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've spent years pursuing justice, Madeline. Maybe it's time I pursued happiness instead." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "If you'll have me." The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her. "The Circle C is a lot of work for one person," she said, her voice teasing despite the emotion welling up inside her. "I could use a capable partner." "Just a partner?" Zachary asked, his eyes never leaving hers. Madeline's smile widened. "To start with, though I have a feeling that arrangement might evolve over time." Zachary's free hand came up to gently touch her bruised jaw, his touch feather light. "I nearly lost you today," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I heard you call my name when I saw Pike with that knife." "But you didn't lose me," Madeline replied softly. "You saved me. You saved everything. You saved yourself," he corrected. "I just helped a little along the way." The admiration in his eyes made her feel stronger than she had in months. This man saw her not as a vulnerable woman in need of protection, but as a partner worthy of respect. "Stay," she whispered, leaning closer. "Not because I need protection, but because I want you here. Because we make a good team, you and I." "We do at that," Zachary agreed, his smile deepening as he closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that felt simultaneously like a culmination and a beginning. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, conveying all the feelings that had been building between them through days of danger and nights of watchful vigilance. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Madeline rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Not while you're breathing," she murmured. "What?" Zachary asked, his hand stroking her hair. She looked up at him, remembering the words that had given her hope when he first arrived. "That's what you said when you rode in. That Pike and his men wouldn't take my ranch, not while you're breathing. You kept your word." "I intend to keep all my promises to you, Madeline Calloway," Zachary said solemnly, "for as long as you'll have me." As the sun rose fully over the Circle C, casting its golden light across the land that had seen so much struggle and now promised so much joy, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that her father's legacy was secure. Not just the ranch he had built, but the values he had instilled in her: courage, perseverance, and the strength to fight for what mattered. And now, with Zachary by her side, that legacy would continue to grow and thrive. Together, they would build something even stronger than what had come before. 6 months later, the Circle C Ranch was transformed. The bullet holes had been patched, the burned shed rebuilt, and new fencing erected around the expanded cattle pastures. The most significant change, however, was the sound of laughter that now regularly echoed across the property. Madeline stood on the porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands against the early spring chill, watching as Zachary instructed young Tom, now a full-time ranch hand, on the proper way to break a particularly stubborn colt. Her husband's patience was evident even from a distance, his steady voice carrying on the morning breeze. Husband. The word still brought a smile to her face, even 3 months after they'd exchanged vows in a simple ceremony at the ranch, attended by half the town of Bonanza and several U.S. Marshals who'd worked with Zachary over the years. Sheriff Morgan had given her away in her father's stead, his gruff exterior softening as he'd told her how proud her pa would have been to see the ranch thriving and his daughter so happy. Frank Dawson had served as Zachary's best man, the older ranch hand having become a trusted friend and occasional foreman when they needed extra help. The arrest of Walter Blackwell and his subsequent trial had been the talk of the territory for months. The federal investigation had revealed a web of corruption that stretched from Arizona to Washington, D.C., involving railroad executives, land speculators, and government officials. Vernon Pike had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, his testimony helping to ensure Blackwell would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Zachary had officially resigned from the Marshal's service 2 weeks after the showdown at the ranch, though he occasionally consulted on cases that brought his former colleagues to the area. His experience as a lawman had proven invaluable in establishing the Circle C as a place that commanded respect, and his skill with cattle rivaled Madeline's own, making them truly equal partners in the operation. The sound of a horse approaching drew Madeline from her reflections. A rider was coming up the road from Bonanza, and she recognized the distinctive figure of Sheriff Morgan. Setting down her coffee, she waved to Zachary, pointing toward their visitor. By the time the sheriff reached the yard, both Madeline and Zachary were waiting to greet him. "Sheriff," Zachary called, "what brings you out our way?" Morgan dismounted, removing his hat in greeting. "Morning, Marshal, old habits die hard, I suppose. Mrs. Vance." He nodded to Madeline. "Got some news I thought you'd want to hear in person." "Come inside," Madeline invited. "I've got fresh coffee." Seated at the kitchen table, Morgan accepted the offered cup gratefully. "Just received word from the territorial governor. The railroad spur line is officially confirmed. Construction begins next month." Madeline and Zachary exchanged a look of surprise and cautious optimism. "Will it cross Circle C land?" Zachary asked. Morgan nodded. "The survey puts it along your eastern boundary. The railroad company is offering a fair price for the right-of-way, from what I hear. Nothing like what Blackwell and his cronies were planning to pay, mind you. This is legitimate." "That's good news," Madeline said thoughtfully. "The railroad will make it easier to get our cattle to market." "And increase the value of the surrounding land considerably," Zachary added. "We've been thinking of expanding if the price was right." Morgan smiled knowingly. "Figured you might be interested in that. The Jackson place to the north is going up for sale. Old man Jackson's moving to California to live with his daughter." Zachary's hand found Madeline's under the table, a silent question passing between them. They discussed expansion several times, especially with the prospect of starting a family in the near future. "We'll look into it," Madeline decided, squeezing Zachary's hand in agreement. "Thank you for bringing the news personally, Sheriff." After Morgan departed, Madeline and Zachary walked hand in hand to the top of the small rise overlooking the ranch. From this vantage point, they could see across most of the circle, see the grazing cattle, the sturdy barn, the house that had become a true home since Zachary had joined her there. "What do you think?" Zachary asked, his arm slipping around her waist. "About expanding?" Madeline leaned into his embrace, considering the question. "I think Pa would approve. He always said a ranch either grows or dies. And the railroad," he pressed, "it will bring changes to the valley." "Change isn't always bad," Madeline replied, turning to face him. Some changes have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Zachary smiled at that, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she'd come to love. Speaking of changes, he said, his voice taking on a hint of anticipation, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. I received a letter from my brother in Kansas. He's considering moving west with his family, maybe settling near us. That's wonderful, Madeline exclaimed. I'd love to meet your family. Then she bit her lip, suddenly nervous. And there's something I've been meaning to tell you too. Oh. Zachary's eyebrows rose expectantly. Madeline took a deep breath, joy bubbling up inside her. I visited Dr. Wilson yesterday while you were checking the north pasture. It seems the Circle C will have another resident come fall. For a moment, Zachary stared at her, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension. You mean, yes, Madeline confirmed, her eyes shining. We're going to have a baby. Zachary's face transformed with wonder and delight. He lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around as laughter burst from both of them. A baby, he repeated when he finally set her down, his hands cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Our child. Our future, Madeline corrected softly. The next chapter for the Circle C. As Zachary lowered his head to kiss her, his gray eyes full of promise and love, Madeline knew that all the struggles they had endured had led them exactly where they were meant to be. From the moment, a determined marshal had ridden into her yard and declared that Outlaws wouldn't take her ranch while he was breathing. Their paths had been intertwined, leading to this shared happiness that neither could have imagined alone. The Circle C had survived drought, death, and the schemes of desperate men. Now, under their joint stewardship and with the blessing of new life, it would continue to thrive for generations to come, a legacy of love as much as land. In the years that followed, the Circle C grew into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Zachary and Madeline welcomed 2 sons and a daughter, raising them with stories of courage and perseverance, teaching them to value both justice and compassion. The railroad brought prosperity to the valley as predicted, and with it came new neighbors, new opportunities, and occasionally new challenges. But through it all, the Vance family stood strong together, facing each dawn with the same determination that had brought them through their first days together. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful under the starlit sky, Zachary would often draw Madeline close and whisper, "Not bad for a stubborn rancher and an ex-marshal, wouldn't you say?" To which Madeline would invariably reply with a kiss and a smile that had only deepened with the passing years. Not bad at all, for as long as we're breathing.